শ্রদ্ধেয় অধ্যক্ষ ডক্টর কৌস্তভ ভট্টাচার্য, স্নেহভাজন প্রসেনজিৎ সাহা, স্নেহভাজন ইফতিকার রহমান, স্নেহভাজন শ্রীকান্ত বসাক, সুপ্রভাত ঘোষ এবং অন্যান্য সকলে যাদের মিলিত প্রচেষ্টায় এই ধরনের একটা মহতি সেমিনারের আয়োজন করা গেছে একটা যুগ সন্ধিক্ষণে 22শে শ্রাবণে, তাদের সকলকে আবার ধন্যবাদ জানিয়ে আমি আমার বক্তব্য উপস্থাপন করব। অনেকে হয়তো বাংলাভাষী নয়, বিভিন্ন প্রদেশের প্রতিনিধিত্ব করছেন, সত্যি মণ্ডলীতে আছেন, তাদের সুবিধার জন্য মূলত ইংরেজিতে বক্তব্য উপস্থাপন করলেও প্রশ্নোত্তর পর্বে কেউ যদি বাংলায় প্রশ্ন করেন বাংলায় উত্তর দিতে ভালো লাগবে। কোনো আলোচনা যদি পরে কেউ বাংলায় করতে চান ভালো লাগবে। কিছু কিছু বাংলায় বলবো, মূলত ইংরেজিতে বলবো, যাতে একটা বৃহত্তর সত্যি মণ্ডলীর সুবিধায় আসে এই ধরনের গুরুত্বপূর্ণ একটা সেমিনারে উদ্যোগ। I'll be speaking on Gandhi, Tagore and India's composite culture. I'm grateful to the college for organizing a seminar on this topic at a critical juncture so far as South Asian history is concerned. Now, I start with a focus on historiographical shift manifested in the scholars interested in Gandhi and Gandhian movement and thought. Those scholars in the West have taken pains to contextualize theology in order to provide a more comprehensive picture of society, culture, and even polity. The study of theology is still in its embryonic stage so far as South Asia is concerned. Overwhelming majority of the Indian population believe in one religion or other, but we could not develop any full-fledged department devoted to the study of comparative theology. You can mention only 2 or 3 institutions like that. That's a lacuna in our academic endeavor. So from that perspective, I would try to understand Gandhi's understanding of composite culture, সমন্বয়িত সংস্কৃতি গান্ধী কিভাবে দেখেছেন বোঝার চেষ্টা করব। এই unfortunately shared by some Indian historians that religion is a source of tension and it should not be brought within the ambit of serious historical research. Of course, there are many exceptions, I admit. Actually, this view was being challenged by some historians since the late 1970s and particularly since the 1980s. That is, scholars started to realize the importance of carrying out research on comparative theology. Theology should be understood from historical perspective. Gandhi understood that long time ago. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad understood that long time ago. Rabindranath Tagore definitively understood that long time ago. So that should be reflected in the curriculum formulation of our academic institutions, but that effort is lacking in my opinion. We have to overcome that to encounter many problems we are facing in the 21st century, not only in South Asia, but also beyond. Now, those who challenge this theory that theology should not be studied, religion should not be studied, among them Satish Chandra is a leading figure. The governor historian of Bengal, former governor historian of Bengal, Sayyid Nurul Hasan is one important figure. Hiren Mukherjee, the great parliamentarian, was one important voice so far as this sort of discourse is concerned. Late Professor Amolendu Dey also carried out research on composite culture. Eminent medievalist Satish Chandra, whom I have mentioned a while ago, his major work, one of his major works is Parties and Politics at the Mughal Court, which appeared in 1959. He was an Allegorian by that time. Now, this work is concentrating on politics, there's no doubt about that. But if you carefully read this book, you will find that he is gradually understanding the significance of studying comparative theology, composite culture. Without studying composite culture, comparative theology, Indian civilization, Indian history could not be understood. This was his realization. That is manifested, resonated in the pages of this book, that is Partisan Politics at the Mughal Court by Satish Chandra. So I would say that from the late 1950s, scholars were becoming very much conscious about the significance of carrying out research on composite culture, comparative religion, and theology. But still, unfortunately, this sort of research is in its infancy so far as South Asia is concerned. Now, the leading historians of India and other countries who are generally known for their pioneering works, seminal works on Gandhi, have generally studied this epoch making figure in Indian history in the context of political movements, in the context of developments culminating in the partition of South Asia and independence of the subcontinent. They study how he was successful in mobilizing the masses, how Gandhi was successful in mobilizing women in Indian political struggle against colonial hegemony. They concentrated on that aspect, how Gandhi was successful or not in the round table conference and so on. But they hardly studied, or they had given less importance to this aspect, that is Gandhi's interest in comparative theology, comparative religious studies. Gandhi's interest and prolonged research on Islam, for example. These aspects had been ignored by major historians who made uh, major contributions on Gandhi in Indian historiography or in the world historiography related to Gandhi. So we are trying to emancipate scholarship on Gandhi from such constraints. It would be necessary to historically interpret Gandhi's approach to different religions, including Islam and Muslims. In this much awaited, often very rewarding. This is my from a liberal Vaishnava background, which enabled him to interact freely with the Jains, Parsis, and Muslims, even during his school days. His school provided with him an eclectic background. While in England, Gandhi was influenced by Gita and Bible, which brought him closer to the world of comparative theology we have mentioned earlier. In Indian historiography, the recognition of comparative theology is a recent phenomenon, I've implied. However, Gandhi could anticipate its relevance for India's plural society in the late 19th century. This is very significant. Now, 1890s mentioned by Dr. Kaustav Bhattacharya also, and others also, Krishna Chandra Ghosh also, that 1890s is very significant. In the 1890s, Vivekananda was speaking in the World Conference, Congress of Religions. In the 1890s, you will find that Aurobindo Ghosh is articulating his view on the emancipation of the subjugated countries, including India. In the 1890s, you find the emergence of Gandhi, not in India, but elsewhere. You see the emergence of Gandhi. Gandhi is preparing himself for the freedom struggle in India, but in other countries, sometimes in England, sometimes in South Africa, and so on. So 1890s is a defining decade so far as our struggle for freedom is concerned. In the 1890s, Brahmos also made significant contribution in the Chicago Conference, often ignored. But the Brahmos, Pratap Chandra Majumdar, the Brahmo leader, made a significant contribution in the 1890s. So in my opinion, our entry point can be 1890s. It's a defining moment in Indian history, in India's struggle for freedom. A new dimension was added to Gandhi's eclectic bent of mind during this time, as he established contacts with Muslim merchants and many Christians while in South Africa. Gandhi delved deep into theological discourse after reading Sells Quran. Sells Quran is very famous, as you know. After reading Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You, a very famous piece by Tolstoy. The Kingdom of God is Within You. And the famous essayist Carlyle's writings impressed Gandhi studies. So this is an important decade. This decade was very important, 1890s, a defining decade in India's struggle for freedom. Now, reading of this stuff, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Gandhi carried out this sort of studies while he was abroad. He was not interested in this sort of theological literature while he was very young and while he was in India. His interest grew when he visited South Africa as well as England. This is interesting. I draw your attention to this fact. Now, this did not reduce him to a mere recluse. That is, his intensive study of theology did not reduce him to a mere recluse. And that is an element of modernity in Gandhi. Unlike medieval scholars who were engrossed in scholasticism and isolation, some sort of isolation from society, Gandhi was not isolated. Gandhi was coming forward to join various social movements, political movements. That is very crucial so far as understanding Gandhi is concerned. It incentivized Gandhi, that is, reading of theology, incentivized Gandhi to become the future leader of the colonized people who would combine the bravery and frugality of the prophet to defy the constraints of colonial rule. This is very significant. And this reading of different religious scriptures, including Islam, enabled Gandhi to develop a theory with which he tried to challenge not only the divide and rule policy of the British, but also the two nation theory of the Muslim League, and also the exclusivism of the Hindu Mahasabha. This is very much important to understand Gandhi's contribution in our freedom struggle. Now, Gandhi understood that the ulama did not constitute a homogeneous community. There can be different sorts of ulama. Ulama can speak in many voices. Even, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad also represented the ulama. But he's a very different sort of an alim who was modernizer, who was a modernizer, who was forward looking, who was rational, who was unifying, who was harmonizing, who was pluralistic, who was eclectic, and so on, who was dynamic, so on. And I will not have the time, but later on try to explore the linkage between the works of translation works of Azad and Gandhi's understanding of Islam, a crucial aspect of India's struggle for freedom, often ignored by historians in India and abroad who concentrated on Gandhi and his contribution to freedom struggle. Now, Azad was one ulama, one alim, who was interested in expanding the concept of ijtihad. Ijtihad means the right of the learned to interpret scriptures according to changing circumstances. A very dynamic aspect within Islam, often ignored by scholars these days. But Azad understood the significance of ijtihad. Even the Prophet Muhammad put emphasis on ijtihad. So Azad, in the context of our freedom struggle, put emphasis on ijtihad, like Gandhi. That is the right of the individual to interpret scriptures according to changing circumstances. A very modernizing, rational aspect so far as our encounter with theology is concerned. So this sort of an engagement, this sort of a focus, this sort of an emphasis culminated in the development of liberal, human and rational outlook in both Gandhi and Azad. And some others would try to discourage ijtihad, like the ulama sponsored by the Muslim League. They would discourage ijtihad. You know why? And they would ignore the Modinan Constitution or the Peace Treaty of Hudaybiyah emphasized by Gandhi and Azad. This Modinan Constitution and the Peace Treaty of Hudaybiyah had been emphasized by Azad and Gandhi because they had been very significant in the life of the Prophet Muhammad. Because by putting emphasis on these events like Modinan Constitution and the Peace Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which occurred during the lifetime of the Prophet, Azad and Gandhi tried to confirm the eclectic, pluralistic nature of the Prophet. That is, theoretically, the Prophet sustained a pluralistic, or at least contemplated a pluralistic society, contemplated composite culture. Now, this was ignored by the ulama. sponsored by the Muslim League. This was the argument of Gandhi and Azad. So that's why they found that theological discourse is very important in India's struggle for freedom, because this will enable the politicians to challenge the exclusivist ulama sponsored by the Muslim League at a theoretical plane to move forward with India's freedom struggle in a harmonizing, pluralistic, cosmopolitan manner. So this is one important understanding of Gandhi. So that's why Gandhi studied theology, including Islamic theology. Now there is another this type of ulama, as you know, that is this who had a very negative attitude towards ijtihad. We call it the second type of ulama. First type of ulama was represented by Maulana Azad, and the second type of ulama was represented by those sponsored by the Muslim League. They subscribed to the two nation theory I have implied earlier, much to the consternation of Gandhi and Azad, and of course Rabindranath Tagore. Gandhi's celebration of composite culture was manifested in his speeches on Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity, which he delivered at Johannesburg in 1905. The egalitarian principles of Islam appealed to him in the context of untouchability prevalent in Indian society. Gandhi observed that there was creative interaction between Hinduism and Islam in medieval India, as he tried to explore the commonalities between the fakirs and the yogis. He found commonalities between the fakirs and the yogis, who interacted with the common people, who led a very austere or simple life, who inspired the common people, and they trained the common people to live a very pluralistic, composite life, very eclectic life, meaningful life, where there will be creative engagement between different communities. This was their goal. While the Muslim League and the Hindu Mahasabha distanced themselves from such practice, just exemplified by the fakirs and yogis of medieval India. The Gandhi wanted to revive that eclectic spirit, that cosmopolitan spirit, that composite culture. It resonated in the lives and preachings of fakirs and yogis. We shall have occasions to discuss how Tagore was also influenced by this sort of philosophy. The coast of Gujarat, where Gandhi was born and spent his childhood, is a part of India which extends out towards the continent of Africa and to the trade routes of the Middle East, and passing through Egypt and Arabia. This route finally reaches the bustling Mediterranean world. A noted scholar has rightly pointed out that geography situates Hindus to reach out and experience contact with others. A very dynamic, mercantile Hindus domiciled in the Gujarat coast. And Gandhi will also explore very dynamic Muslim merchants domiciled in the coast of Gujarat. It was a joint venture almost, including the Hindu and Muslim merchants who were looking towards the west. Africa is on the western side of India, as you can understand. It is on the western side of the Arabian Sea. So they were forward-looking merchants, modernizing merchants, eclectic and dynamic merchants, Muslim merchants and Hindu merchants. Very important to Gandhi. Gandhi wanted to just remove the stereotypes related to Islam. Islam is not a stagnant, unchanging religion. There had been dynamic people in Islam as well. Gandhi noticed them. I wanted to incorporate them in India's freedom struggle. We shall see if time permits within a while. Their exposure to diverse civilizations, I mean those dynamic merchants, Hindus and Muslims alike, are likely to make them more flexible, because by mercantile activities they encountered diverse civilizations in different parts of the world. Not surprisingly, many Protestant religious movements in India had been sponsored by the traders. Gandhi's mother also belonged to a family of merchants. This connectivity is important. Gandhi's mother hailed from a mercantile family. Many religious movements in India had linkages with the merchants, say Jainism, Buddhism, Sikhism, and so on. Various other mystical movements, Bhakti movements, had close link, Vaishnava movements, Pranami sect of the Vaishnavas. Gandhi's mother belonged to this Pranami sect of the Vaishnavas as well. had close link. So Gandhi draws our attention to the fact that there is a linkage between the mystic and the merchant. মরমিয়াবাদের সঙ্গে বণিকের যেন যোগ আছে, এই যোগটা খুব গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। মরমিয়াবাদের সঙ্গে বণিকের যোগসূত্রটা গুরুত্বপূর্ণ। গান্ধী এটা অনুভব করেছিলেন। স্বাধীনতা আন্দোলনে এই যোগসূত্রটাকে কাজে লাগাতে চেষ্টা করেছিলেন, একটা ডায়নামিজম দেওয়ার জন্য, একটা ইনক্লুসিভিটি আনার জন্য। Gandhi's mother also belonged to a family of merchants who were affiliated to the Ponami sect of Vaishnava Hinduism. For example, we can mention Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. Even Guru Nanak hailed from the Khatri tribe, Khatri community. Khatris were traders in the Punjabi landscape. Khatris were traders, mainly preferred to stay in the urban pockets because they were interested in trade and commerce. They were the literate section among the Punjabi population during that time, and were the natural teachers of the Punjabi people. So all the first 10 gurus emerged from the Khatris. This linkage was very important. But even the financially successful Khatris were not properly recognized within the Brahmanical caste hierarchy. The Gandhi understood that problem of untouchability, problem of casteism within Indian society, and Brahmanical orthodox hegemony that was vitiating Indian society. Gandhi understood that, wanted to overcome the constraints imposed or inflicted by Brahmanical caste hierarchy and the notion of untouchability, the concept of purity. He understood that. He would try to just create a nation, composite nation, in his project of composite nationalism. Very important. Muslim traders were there in Gujarat for centuries. Gandhi knew them as the representatives of challenging and adventurous life who would go beyond the seas. This dynamic image of Muslims helped Gandhi to develop an unbiased attitude towards the community during his political endeavors. Such an image also made him very optimistic about Muslims, which led him to envision a Hindu-Muslim united front against the colonial regime. Such optimism was resonated in his moves during the Khilafat non-cooperation phase. Indeed, in no other phase of India's struggle for independence do we notice Hindu-Muslim unity of this magnitude. Gandhi's father and uncles, who acted as political administrators under Hindu rulers of the Kathiawar Peninsula, had to deal with Muslims in local political life. Muslims were actually received as guests in the household of Gandhi. In the world of Gandhi's father, Muslims were recognized as a part of the community. So this access to the Muslim community, this exposure to the Muslim community in Gujarat was very important. It left an imprint in the young mind of Gandhi from the time of his school days. He used to go to a school where he could befriend the Muslims, Jains, and Parsis. He reiterated the importance of such neighborliness. শঙ্কর ঘোষ যেটাকে বলছেন যে এই ধরনের মানে প্রতিবেশ সম্বন্ধে ধারণা না থাকলে সেটাকে বলা যেতে পারে বিপন্ন প্রতিবেশ। এই বিপন্ন প্রতিবেশ থেকে গান্ধী উত্তীর্ণ হতে চাইছেন। He befriended Muslims, Jains, and Parsis and reiterated the importance of such neighborliness when in 1942 he was delivering his speeches in the Congress Working Committee. Gandhi's paternal grandfather was involved in a conflict with a local ruler, and one Muslim soldier died while he was defending Gandhi's house, Gandhi's family. A memorial to that soldier, Muslim soldier, still exists in the Vaishnava temple adjoining the family house of Gandhi. Very crucial. You can find the root of Hindu-Muslim amity in this sort of a event. Is this sort of an event which occurred in the family of Gandhi. So young Gandhi thought of Muslims, Jains, and Parsis as natural friends and supporters in common causes. Common cause is the anti-British struggle. Later, when he led the anti-colonial struggle, this sort of an exposure to different communities immensely helped Gandhi to think about a composite culture with which he wanted to sustain India's struggle for independence. Gandhi's parents were of Vaishnava and mercantile backgrounds. Both the merchants and the bhaktos Often they were known for their heterodoxy rather than orthodoxy. They are persecuted by authoritarian state, that is the Bhaktos and the merchants, the mystic and the merchant. মরমিয়াবাদী এবং বণিক দুজনেই রাষ্ট্রের দ্বারা নিপীড়িত হতে পারে। The authoritarian state has a proclivity to persecute both the mystic and the merchant. This is important. And the mystic and merchant both were present in Gandhi's family. We shall see that very soon. Religious orthodoxy, hegemonic orthodoxy, can also challenge the mystics and the merchants. So the authoritarian state and the orthodox religious hegemony, they make a common cause against the mystic and the merchant. And Gandhi will side with the mystic and the merchant, not with the authoritarian state, not with hegemonic orthodoxy. This is very crucial for understanding the nature of Gandhi's anti-colonial struggle. History of India is replete with such examples. Gandhi's responses to the colonial state and religious fundamentalism that was being preached by a section of the ulama sponsored by the Muslim League should be studied in this background. And also Gandhi's approach to Hindu Mahasabha should be studied in this background, in this eclectic background. Gandhi learned to sing hymns from his mother, whose mother was a devotee. It is useful to note that his mother was a Kabirpanthi, that the forms of religious practice that he developed in South Africa and later in his ashrams in India was characterized by hymn singing. এই স্তোত্রগুলোকে গাওয়া হতো গান্ধীর আশ্রমে, ছোটবেলা থেকে এটা অভ্যাস করছেন মায়ের কাছে শুনে। This trend can be traced back to the 15th century when Bhakti movement gathered momentum. It is the age of Kabir in northern India. Historians have studied the interactions between the Bhakti and Sufi saints of medieval South Asia. This Bhakti-Sufi interaction is very important. Gandhi understood the potentiality of these two movements and understood the importance of exploring commonalities between Bhakti and Sufi movements. That would theoretically prepare Gandhi to launch his anti-colonial struggle, which was based on the notion of divide and rule. Gandhi would rather emulate the Bhaktos and the Kalandars. Kalandars wanted to walk miles after miles in the Indian subcontinent, meeting the masses in distress. The Bhakti saints and the Kalandars would walk miles after miles on the Indian soil to meet the distressed, to meet the displaced people, to meet the persecuted people, to meet the wretched people, suffering people. These ambulatory and charismatic leaders encounter diverse civilizations and are less likely to be influenced by any rigid hierarchical system like the caste system. Gandhi's fight against untouchability can also be explained in this light. Gandhi observed that the fakirs and the yogis in medieval India lived almost the same kind of life. And if you remember the film of Richard Attenborough, Gandhi, that famous film Gandhi, you will understand Gandhi was walking miles after miles in that film, while Jinnah was sitting tight in the very well decorated and very posh drawing room. He was a drawing room politician, and Gandhi was the leader of the masses who would be walking miles and after miles, being inspired by the charismatic mystics of Indian civilization since the time, medieval times. The personal religious experience of the Sufis involving the master and the disciple, as mentioned above, was also very important to Gandhi, particularly when he would try to inculcate, like the Murshid, the true spirit of Satyagraha among his followers who resembled the Murids. His followers resembled his Murids. The devotional character of Bhakti songs not only appealed to the Sufis, it also influenced Gandhi. Gandhi publicly acknowledged his love for the hymns of the 15th century poet Kabir. Some of the popular poems used to be sung regularly in the ashram of Gandhi. This is very crucial, and also in the Tolstoy farm of Gandhi in South Africa. Now let us switch over very quickly to Tagore. 22শে শ্রাবণে কবিগুরুর কথা আলোচনা না করলে নয়, তাই কবিগুরুর কথা বলে আমাদের আলোচনা আমরা শেষ করব। যে রবীন্দ্রনাথ একটা সমন্বয়ী সংস্কৃতিকে কিভাবে দেখেছেন, আজকে একবিংশ শতকের সংকটের কথা আপনারা বললেন, সেই সংকটের প্রেক্ষাপটে এই চর্চাটা কতটা প্রাসঙ্গিক সেটা আমরা একটু দেখে নেব। The magnitude of insight manifested in Tagore's engagement with Muslim society would surprise even the experts on Islam. Actually, this firm belief has incentivized me to traverse this less trodden terrain of historical research related to Tagore and his contribution to our freedom struggle and the nation building process. Reconstruction activities in the countryside. There is one thing very common between Gandhi and Tagore. They wanted to carry out their major activities in the countryside. রবীন্দ্রনাথ কলকাতাকে বেছে নিতে পারতেন, গান্ধীও আহমেদাবাদকে বেছে নিতে পারতেন, কিন্তু গান্ধীর আশ্রমটা গ্রামে অবস্থিত, রবীন্দ্রনাথের বিশ্বভারতীয় গ্রামে অবস্থিত। ওরা কলকাতা শহর এবং আহমেদাবাদ থেকে দুজনেই অনেক দূরে চলে গিয়েছিলেন ভারতবর্ষের গ্রামাঞ্চলে, যেখানে ভারতবর্ষের আত্মা সংরক্ষিত আছে। এভাবে ভারতবর্ষের পুনরুজ্জীবনে তারা প্রয়াসী হয়েছিলেন। গুরুত্বপূর্ণ একটা কমন পয়েন্ট। আবার কবিরের কথা বলেছি, কবির সম্বন্ধে রবীন্দ্রনাথও কিন্তু উচ্ছ্বসিত ছিলেন। কীর্তিমোহন সেন এই কবিরকে নিয়ে গবেষণা করে গেছেন রবীন্দ্রনাথের পৃষ্ঠপোষকতায়, এটা আমরা জানি। সুতরাং এই কমন ফ্যাক্টর গুলো আমি মনে রাখতে বলছি। কবির এবং গ্রামাঞ্চল, মরমিয়াবাদ, রবীন্দ্রনাথ এবং গান্ধী দুজনেই আগ্রহী ছিলেন, গ্রামাঞ্চলেও দুজনেই আগ্রহী ছিলেন, কারণ মরমিয়াবাদের মাধ্যমে ভারতবর্ষের আত্মা বা সোলকে বোঝা যায়। ইউ ক্যান এক্সপ্লোর দ্য সোল অফ ইন্ডিয়া বাই স্টাডিং মিস্টিসিজম বা স্টাডিং দ্য কান্ট্রি সাইড। জগজিৎ সিং এই জন্য গান গেয়ে গেছেন, দিল সে বেহতর কোই কিতাব নেই। রবীন্দ্রনাথ এর মধ্যে দিয়ে অনুরণিত হয়েছে এই উপলব্ধি। In his essays, Rabindranath Tagore, in his essays, speeches, stories, novels, and letters, Tagore expressed his views, hope, and deep concern regarding Hindu-Muslim relations. Print media during the time of Tagore and visual media alongside print media of the post-Tagore era played a remarkable role in stereotyping Islam and Muslim society. Both the Oriental and the Occidental media are responsible for this. Hindu and Muslim women enjoyed a greater freedom in the respective classical ages. Both the Hindu and Muslim theoreticians or theologians try to argue that women came to enjoy greater freedom in classical Hinduism and classical Islam respectively. And what was Tagore's response to such an attitude? Tagore was shocked by such an attitude of the Asiatic people, who share a peculiar tendency to glorify their past without unleashing the energy and intention to radically transform their present society, unlike their dynamic Western counterparts inspired by scientific discoveries. Here, Rabindranath Tagore is juxtaposing Western mind with Oriental mind. Remember, Rabindranath Tagore was not exclusively deriving inspiration from the Oriental world. He was equally influenced by the dynamic West, by the rational West, by the scientific West. You have to understand that. And this is true also to a great extent so far as Gandhi is concerned. Tagore points out that at times religiosity is injected into Western mind through Eastern Christianity. However, reason, akal or yukti, reason ultimately triumphs in the West. Ultimately, yukti joy hoy paschatye, alongside the irresistible urge to achieve. এটা হচ্ছে ওয়েস্টার্ন ক্যারেক্টার রবীন্দ্রনাথের মধ্যে, আমাদের এই ক্যারেক্টারটা নেই রবীন্দ্রনাথ মনে করছেন। The culminating point of this urge is to challenge the infallibility of the scriptures or top religious leaders like the Pope. Infallibility of the Pope was challenged in European Renaissance, as you know. Tagore was right, because even the upright intellectuals in India would think several times before sharing such skepticism in public space when it comes to the Oriental world. On another occasion, Tagore recollects how the great poet Tennyson, Tennyson is a great poet, prior to his death, prior to Tennyson's death, briefly mentioned India in one of his compositions. The theme was the great Mughal Akbar's dream. So Tennyson was composing a poem on Akbar's dream, Akbar the Great. অশোক এবং আকবরকে আমরা আদর্শ ভারতীয় সম্রাট মনে করতে পারি, টেগোর এবং গান্ধী সেটা মনে করতেন। In the context of One Night's Dream, I am elaborating on Tennyson's understanding of Akbarite India. In the context of One Night's Dream, Akbar divulged his views on the essence of religion and life before his friend and scholar Abul Fazl. In Tennyson's poetic imagination, Akbar saw in that dream how his successes contributed to the decline of religious and ethnic unity in his empire, which he built so painstakingly. Ultimately, a group of people came from the direction where the sun sets. সূর্য পশ্চিম দিকে অস্ত যায়, সুতরাং পশ্চিম দিক থেকে যারা এসেছেন তারা ব্রিটিশ। Ultimately, a group of people came from the direction where the sun sets and were able to rebuild that temple of Akbarite India where truth, peace, love and justice reign supreme. অর্থাৎ টেনিসন ব্রিটিশ এম্পায়ারটাকেও, ব্রিটিশ এম্পায়ার বিল্ডিং প্রসেসকেও গ্লোরিফাই করছেন এবং আকবরাইট ভারতবর্ষের সঙ্গে তাকে তুলনা করছেন। কারণ টেনিসনের মতে আকবরাইট ভারতবর্ষ গ্লোরিফাইড ছিল, ব্রিটিশ ভারতবর্ষ গ্লোরিফাইড হতে পারে, এইভাবে তিনি দেখছেন। কিন্তু এই মতামত মেনে নিতে রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর আগ্রহী নন, সেটা আমরা দেখে নেব। Tagore prays for the poet's dream to materialize, but observes that in spite of the great labor and expertise involved in the construction of the temple by the British, the greatest god, the god of love, could not be established in that temple. Herein lies, মানে ভালোবাসা ছাড়া তো ঈশ্বর হয় না, সেই ভালোবাসার ঈশ্বরকে ব্রিটিশরা স্থাপন করতে পারেনি। খালি সৌধ, ওই চুন বালি সুরকি, মর্টার আর লাইমের একটা স্থাপত্য সৌধ, অট্টালিকা স্থাপিত হয়েছে এম্পায়ারে, কিন্তু সোল বা ভালোবাসা স্থাপিত হয়নি। কিন্তু মরমিয়া বাদে গ্রামীণ ভারতবর্ষে ভালোবাসার মধ্য দিয়ে আকবরের ভারতবর্ষে সেই সোলটা দেখতে পেয়েছিলেন রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুর। Herein lies the difference, implied Tagore, between the temple of Akbar, where his heart was also involved, and the solid but heartless and soulless structure erected under the British. The influence of the great Sufi mystical tradition apparently inspired Tagore to contemplate such juxtaposition. With keen interest, eclectic Akbar used to listen to the theologians representing Hinduism, Islam, Christianity or Zoroastrianism. Akbar, with his liberal, human and rational outlook, showed respect to the Hindu women in the Mughal Zenana, to the Hindu nobility at the court and the Hindu generals at the battlefield. He went beyond politics and envisaged an inclusive empire in tune with the composite culture of India. But the exogenous people from the land of the setting sun, that is the British, embarked on a policy of non-interference so far as India's religio-cultural life is concerned. Was this detachment a reflection of love? Asks Tagore. Or was it conditioned by political motive? Tagore wondered. Akbar has been rightly picked up by Tagore as an epitome of national integration and communal amity. Akbar was not literate, but in the broad sense of the term, he was learned. In the medieval period, Persian became the language of diplomacy, trade and culture in the regions between Hindustan and Persia. Poets such as Rumi and Hafez were some of the best exponents of Persian Renaissance. And as you know, by reading Rumi, by listening to Rumi, Akbar wanted to build a composite empire, an eclectic empire. And by listening to Hafez, Akbar suspended jizya on the Hindus and the pilgrimage tax on the Hindus, which had been imposed on the Hindus. So in this civilizational dimension, Gandhi and Tagore wanted to envision India, wanted to carry out the nation building process in India. And in their project, the soul, based on the concept of love, mystical love, love which can be nurtured in the Indian countryside, the habitat of the majority of the Indians. They tried to explore the soul of India in the countryside, soul of India in the activities and the preachings of the mystics like Kabir and Vaishnavism and others. So in this endeavor, they were united on Baishe Shravan. And on Baishe Shravan, we show our respect, our eternal respect to both Gandhi and Tagore, who envisioned a composite, eclectic, pluralistic India, which is being threatened now. Thank you for your patience. Thank you so much.
Hello, sir. Are you listening? So there are some questions asked by our participants. You can see the questions in the Google Meet chat box.
Okay. Okay, sure. I will respond now.
Yes, sir, definitely.
Okay. Upama Vishwas, sir, will you please tell in detail about Istihad? I cannot elaborate now because there's a time constraint, and my fellow speaker, Dr. Monosanto Vishwas, is waiting to deliver his talk. So I should not stand between you and Monosanto, who is also an excellent speaker and a sound scholar. But very briefly, I would try to highlight on Ijtihad. Ijtihad means right of the individual to interpret scriptures according to changing circumstances. অর্থাৎ শাস্ত্র ব্যাখ্যা করার ব্যক্তির যে অধিকার সেটাকে ইজতেহাদ বলে। ইটস এ ভেরি মডার্ন কনসেপ্ট। গান্ধী, আজাদ, আবুল কালাম আজাদ, দারা শুকো, they all put emphasis on ijtihad. But unfortunately, it's a travesty that ijtihad has taken a backseat in today's civilization. No one is understanding the importance of ijtihad. মানুষ ভয় পায় আজকাল শাস্ত্রকে বিজ্ঞান দিয়ে বা যুক্তি দিয়ে ব্যাখ্যা করতে ভয় পায়। আমার সামনে একটা বই ছিল, আমিও আনতে ভয় পেলাম, স্টিফেন হকিংসের সেই সৃষ্টিতত্ত্ব, সেই সৃষ্টিতত্ত্বের সঙ্গে অনেকের সৃষ্টিতত্ত্ব মিলবে না। তাই বলে কি আমরা শিখে, রবীন্দ্রনাথ বলছিলেন তারা অত্যন্ত স্পিরিচুয়াল ব্যক্তিত্ব, কিন্তু তারা বলছেন তা সত্ত্বেও প্রত্যেক মানুষের শাস্ত্র ব্যাখ্যা করার অধিকার থাকা উচিত। অর্থাৎ একটা শাস্ত্র যেটা অনেকদিন আগে লেখা হয়েছে সেটা একবিংশ শতকে বা বিংশ শতকের প্রেক্ষাপটে, ভারতবর্ষীয় প্রেক্ষাপটে কতটা উপযোগী সেটা ভেবে দেখার, ব্যাখ্যা করে দেখার অধিকার ব্যক্তির বা রাজনীতিবিদের আছে। এটা তারা বলেছিলেন। এটা একটা খুব মডার্ন একটা জায়গা। প্রশ্ন করার অধিকার, বিচার করার অধিকার, যুক্তিকে ব্যবহার করার অধিকার, বাস্তব জীবনে যুক্তিকে প্রয়োগ করার অধিকার, এটাই ইজতেহাদ। কিন্তু এই ইজতেহাদ দুঃখজনক ভাবে আজকে সমস্ত ধর্ম থেকেই পিছনে সিট নিয়ে গেছে। হ্যাঁ, সেটা একটা আমি সংক্ষেপে এভাবে বললাম। রাহুল শেখ, গান্ধীর সঙ্গে উলামাদের সম্পর্ক কি স্বাধীনতা আন্দোলনকে প্রভাবিত করেছিল? গান্ধীজি কতটা সুবিবাদ দ্বারা প্রভাবিত হয়েছিলেন এটা অনেকটা বলার চেষ্টা করেছি। গান্ধীজির সঙ্গে উলামাদের সম্পর্কটা আমি ইঙ্গিত দিয়েছি, এটা একটা মিশ্র সম্পর্ক ছিল, একটা জটিল এবং মিশ্র সম্পর্ক ছিল। মনে রাখতে হবে, মৌলানা আবুল কালাম আজাদ একজন উলামা, একজন আলিম, তিনি লার্নেড একজন মুসলিম মৌলানা, কিন্তু তার সঙ্গে গান্ধীর সম্পর্ক অত্যন্ত ভালো। গান্ধীর সম্পর্ক মৌলানা আবুল কালাম আজাদের সঙ্গে অত্যন্ত ভালো। দুজনে কিন্তু, এই আবুল কালাম আজাদ কিন্তু একজন মডার্নাইজিং উলামা, যিনি ইজতেহাদে বিশ্বাস করেন। আবার আমি আগে ইঙ্গিত করেছি এমন উলামাও আছে যাদের রক্ষণশীলরা পৃষ্ঠপোষকতা করে। কারা আমি আগে বলেছি, আমি পুনরাবৃত্তি করছি না, যে যারা ইজতেহাদে জোর দেয় না, অর্থাৎ যুক্তিকে ভয় পায়, ভাবে যুক্তিকে প্রয়োগ করলে তাদের যে মানে পেশাগুলো বিপর্যস্ত হয়ে যেতে পারে। আপনি গৌর কিশোর ঘোষের প্রেম নেই উপন্যাসে শফিকুল ইসলামের অ্যাটিটিউড দেখবেন উলামাদের প্রতি, তাহলে এই জিনিসটা অনেকটা বুঝতে পারবেন। তো উলামারা যুক্তিকে ভয় পায়, ইজতেহাদকে ভয় পায়। গান্ধীর বন্ধু এই উলামারা হতে পারে না, আবুল কালাম আজাদের মতো উলামারা হতে পারে। সুতরাং গান্ধীর যে দৃষ্টিভঙ্গি, গান্ধীকে বুঝতে পেরেছিলেন এক শ্রেণীর উলামা, তারা গান্ধীর সঙ্গে ছিলেন, তারা খিলাফত আন্দোলনকে শক্তিশালী করেছে। আবার আরেক শ্রেণীর উলামা গান্ধীর সঙ্গে থাকেননি, তারা মুসলিম লীগের দিকে চলে গেছেন। তারা মনে করেছেন গান্ধীর ইসলাম নিয়ে কোনো কথা বলার অধিকার নেই, এভাবে গান্ধীকে তারা কোণঠাসা করতে চেষ্টা করেছেন। সুতরাং উলামাদের মধ্যে একটা মিশ্র প্রতিক্রিয়া ছিল গান্ধীর আন্দোলনের প্রতি, এটা আমাদের মনে রাখতে হবে। অবশ্যই গান্ধী সুফিবাদের দ্বারা উদ্বুদ্ধ হয়েছিলেন। গান্ধী মনে করেছিলেন ভারতবর্ষের সঙ্গে ইসলামের যোগাযোগের তিনটে স্তর আছে। একটা স্তরে রাজনৈতিকভাবে ইসলামের সঙ্গে ভারতবর্ষের যোগাযোগ হয়, যখন বিভিন্ন যুদ্ধ জয়ী যারা ভারতবর্ষে আসেন, মুসলিম যুদ্ধ জয়ী তুর্কো আফগানরা আসেন, এটা পলিটিক্যাল ডাইমেনশন। একটা থিওলজিক্যাল ডাইমেনশন আছে, মুসলিম শাস্ত্রবিদ বা উলামারা ভারতবর্ষে আসেন, মুসলিম আইনজ্ঞরা ভারতবর্ষে আসেন। গান্ধী সেটাকে দ্বিতীয় স্তর বলেছেন। তবে গান্ধী এই প্রথম বা দ্বিতীয় স্তর সম্বন্ধে ততটা আগ্রহী ছিলেন না। গান্ধী আগ্রহী ছিলেন ভারতবর্ষের সঙ্গে ইসলামের যোগসূত্রের ক্ষেত্রে সুফিরা যেখানে সৃজনাত্মক ভূমিকা পালন করেছেন সেই দিকে গান্ধীর জোর ছিল। এটা প্রমাণ করে যে গান্ধীর সঙ্গে সুফিদের যে যোগাযোগ, সেটা কতটা, সম্পর্কটা কতটা ঘনিষ্ঠ। অর্চনা ভার্মা, স্যার, was Sufism also related to mercantilism? Yes, a very good question. That I have mentioned, the steps taken by Gandhi to achieve a cosmopolitan nation. Gandhi wanted active participation from all the communities, not only all communities, but from all walks of life. Gandhi befriended the peasantry. Gandhi befriended the working class people. Gandhi befriended the laborers in the mines. Gandhi befriended the day laborers. Gandhi also befriended the nationalist bourgeoisie or the nationalist capitalists. So this is very important. And remember, there is a close connection between the merchant and the mystic. You will find wherever Sufism flourished, particularly think about some major Sufi centers. I don't have the time to elaborate on that. But if you read my book mentioned by Krishna Chandra Ghosh when he introduced me, that is Islam in South Asia, if you read that book, you will understand. I have discussed that elaborately there, that wherever Sufi centers were established, they had a linkage with the mercantile elements. Wherever Sufism became popular, for example, think about the Sufi festival Urs. Urs attracted trade and commerce. So, in this way, you can explore commonalities between Sufism and mercantilism. So, there are many other questions. Um, yes, I think I have answered. There were three questions. I have answered three questions. And yes, hello.
Sir, there are other questions. The
Where?
screen you are seeing. There are other questions above those questions.
Okay, let me check. Should I click the screen?
Yes. In the chat section, you can.
But chat stays. It is hanging হয়ে যাচ্ছে, hang করে যাচ্ছে আমার chat
Sir,
session.
other questions. I am dictating for you. Other question they are asking about. Besides the Purvi Dash, she's asking. Besides the cosmopolitan thread, do you think Muslims and Hindus were only treated as political categories by Gandhi?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question. No, I won't accept that. But here I would draw a comparative study between Gandhi and Tagore. Tagore was primarily a cultural entity. Tagore was a poet. So Tagore definitively did not contemplate Muslims and Hindus and others at political category. Now your question is whether Gandhi treated them as a political category. No, Gandhi also did not. Though primarily Gandhi is a politician, not a poet. Gandhi was a politician, philosopher, and Tagore was a poet, philosopher. But Gandhi's self or Gandhi's identity can be interpreted at two levels: his political self and his philosophical self, his civilizational self. As I've mentioned, that nurturing of Gandhi from his childhood in his house, him singing, listening to the dohas of Kabir and singable qualities, this created an impression on young Gandhi. He was further exposed in his school. He opted for Persian, not for Sanskrit, as his optional paper. I am not delving deep into that, but these are important influences on young Gandhi. So he genuinely believed a collaboration between Hindus and Muslims, not only in the nation building process in political terms, but by reconstruction. He also meant reconstruction of Indian civilization and culture, reconstruction of rural economy, reconstruction of rudimentary instruments associated with rural economy. All these had been entangled in Gandhi's notion of nation, composite nation. So yes, to achieve political success, he was mobilizing Hindus and Muslims, but his interest in Hindus and Muslims, his treatment of Hindus and Muslims did not end in their political characteristic features. It went beyond this political imagination of Hindus and Muslims, and it culminated in their redefinition as cultural civilizational entities. This is my response to your very important question. Thank you for asking. I'm delighted by your question. Any other question?
Sir, we are like now that's all.